Oh, donut time!
Hey, Yashiro! What the heck are you doing here outside of the novel? Don't you know you have to be in the show in like 5 minutes?
Donut time takes precedence. I shall be quick. Yum.
um, right. So, anyway, welcome everyone to the live reading of Adachi and Shimamura Volume 4, Chapter 4, translated by Sneik and brought to you today by the Doki Doki Reading Club. Today's episode is all about Shimamura, thinking about how her relationship with Adachi is changing now that they are in their second year. Jeez, don't run so fast. That blue dust coming out of you is giving me allergies. Also, take that donut out of your mouth and try that again.
I said, no, it's not.
Not what? What are you talking about?
That's not what the episode is about. The episode is about how Shimamura falls asleep. Then I teach her show space secrets. Did you even read it, Earthling?
Well, get back into your universe so we can start this already, would you?
Mm-hmm. The donuts in this universe are great. Bye. Thanks for the donuts.
Wait! Those were for the reading team! Ah, dang it. She's gone. Anyway, folks, grab your number one friend and enjoy the show. It's time to Adashima and chill.
Chapter 4 Will and Friend. How long has it been since I last heard Adachi's voice? In general, I wasn't sure. However, as for hearing it within the classroom we transferred to for a second year, this might honestly have been the first time.
Shimamura?
A voice called to me. I turned my head towards it, only to find Adachi standing there. The skin around her lips and nose had been visibly tense, overall making her expression appear quite stiff. In a similar manner, the way in which she moved was as clumsy as ever, almost like she was a machine in a desperate need for oiling. I can't stress enough how unnatural she felt. I seriously found myself wondering if her bones were chafing against one another. So, she had come to school. That probably also meant that I'd been right about her being at the sports hall. I wasn't the only one taken aback by Adachi's sudden appearance. The other girls had also stopped eating and were now all staring at her, confused.
Can I sit next to you?
She asked me. Personally, I didn't mind, but what about the rest? I tried to examine their reactions, but based on their anxious eyes, busily trying to look somewhere else, it was pretty clear that no one was going to say anything.
Be my guest.
She'd asked me specifically, so it made sense that I should be the one to answer. With that in mind, I invited her in. Well, I say that, but we didn't actually have an extra chair prepared. Rotating my head, I scanned the classroom for any free ones we could use. However, by the time I turned back, Adachi had already crouched down on the floor next to me. I suppose I took care of that. Following this, she placed the bag from the school canteen she'd been carrying onto the table. The heavy thud the bag made prompted me to take a closer look. Let's just say I was pretty shocked by what I saw.
You have quite a few of those, don't you?
Inside, there were 3 or maybe even 4 individual pastries. Who was she? Yashiro? Could she really eat all of those by herself?
If you want, I can give you one.
Adachi stated, turning the bag into my direction. I was already halfway through the one I bought myself earlier, although I suppose that if he was willing to offer me something for free, then it was worth a look at least. Also, she sure had gotten generous, hadn't she? I distinctively remember her being annoyed at the prospect of having to hand me over money when we went to buy lunch in the early stages of our friendship. I compared the pastries before me, and out of these options, the gem one seemed the most delicious. And yet, I still hesitated to reach out for it.
Hmm.
My eyes shifted towards my stomach region. I kinda wanted to grip my sides and see how much extra right I was packing. Although being in front of everyone, I obviously didn't do that. Regardless, there was no way that she could possibly eat all of these by herself, and with that in mind, I ultimately ended up accepting her kind offer, that being the gem bun.
Want one more?
No, I don't think I can eat that much. Thanks.
The stiff expression on Adachi's face began to unravel as I thanked her. Ever so faintly, you could see the corners of her mouth twist into a smile. It might have been due to the fact that all the muscles in her face had been tensed up that the tip of her nose now appeared slightly reddish. Using Adachi opening the seal of her pastry as our chance, the rest of us resumed eating. Despite that, our eyes remained pointed towards her, and similarly, she continued staring at only me. She didn't bother greeting the other 3. No, it was like she hadn't even noticed that they were there. Speaking of them, they continued eating without a word. Though they were all clearly curious about Adachi, no one was brave enough to go ahead and open their mouth. A massive hole had been torn into the dome of sorts surrounding us by the meteoroid that was Adachi, releasing the languid yet warm air inside. Furthermore, with the way things were, it seemed unlikely this whole thing was ever going to be plugged. As far as I was concerned, there was something about the sight of Adachi crouching next to me like a loyal dog that made it impossible for me to calm down. Was there really no chair for her to use? I once again scanned the room, and this time, my eyes came across one. I immediately got up and went to get it. Having received permission from the people around it, I picked the chair up, brought it back, and offered it to Adachi. She thanked me shortly before sitting down. Satisfied that this matter was dealt with, I sat down myself. Even now, Adachi was only ever looking at me. Not that I had expected anything else. Her gaze was so intense that I could almost hear it pierce the air. I watched her munch the pastry with small bites, looking like she wasn't particularly interested in what it tasted like. There, our eyes met. Her pupils turned slightly upwards as usual and tingled with emotion, caught mine. Unlike the dry expression she always had during class, the look on her face now almost made it seem like she was making an appeal of some sort. I found myself staring at her, trying to grasp the meaning behind it. Gradually, I stopped paying attention to the questioning stares of the other girls. I didn't feel that the bonds between us were particularly deep, and so, in a way, You might say that it was a blessing that Adachi had returned. The silence continued. How long was it going to last for? Likely until Adachi relaxed her posture. In that case, I felt confident saying there wasn't going to be an end to it. The thought of Adachi willingly entering our circle hadn't even crossed my mind. She had really come to the classroom just to sit next to me? Perhaps. Based on what I knew about Adachi, that did feel like something she would do. No, her pose. It seemed so extreme. Like, did she have no idea how to conform with her surroundings? At the same time, it was very Adachi. I found myself wanting to give her a pass, almost as if my senses had grown slightly numb just looking at her. What sort of strange and mental state had she experienced to come here? That I did not know. What I did know, however, was that this must have taken her an amount of courage and determination near the maximum she was able to muster. That much was clear to me, sitting next to her. It seemed more than likely that this knowledge played a part in the difference in reaction between me and the other girls. The things Adachi had brought in with her were called, putting them in direct contrast with the spring air around us. There was even some awkwardness sprinkled in. Did the gazes of the others hurt her? I couldn't imagine otherwise. Had it been me in her shoes, I would have found just the act of squeezing myself in overwhelmingly difficult. It was for that reason I had no intention to disavow Adachi's choice. To use convenient, cowardly words, to each their own. There were those for whom even 100 friends weren't enough, but also those who felt satisfied with just a single one. As such, what mattered the most was that each person had enough to match their own capacity. Adachi, well, it was a bit embarrassing to say this, but the conclusion I came up with was that she was satisfied with just me. Assuming that was the case led me to another question. What about me? Did I need more? Or was one person enough? Though there were times I found myself thinking about that, I still hadn't reached a solid conclusion. All I knew was where the listless atmosphere between us had disappeared to.
I predicted earlier that my relationship with Sancho's group will come to an end with the change of the seating order. But with the way things were, it seemed like it might happen before that. School came to an end, and it's as if the lunch break was repeating itself, Adachi walked over to me. I got the feeling she'd made extra sure to be the first to do so, almost like it was her goal not to lose to anyone else.
Let's walk home together.
Suddenly, I stared up at her. This short pause caused Adachi to lower her brows, and looking at her, I couldn't help but smile a little.
Sure.
I purposefully made my voice sound a bit unkind. Having perhaps caught on to my intention, Adachi's lips turned into a slight pout.
What was that nasty tone just now?
You're
Using a,
just imagining it.
using a simple light to touch any repercussions, I took my bath and got up. As I did, I could feel the eyes of someone else on me. I thought about turning around to see who it was, but ultimately decided not to. There just wasn't any point to doing so. It wasn't like I could do anything anyway. Then again, given that we live in different directions, I suppose that walking home merely referred to us passing the school gate and then going our separate ways. That thing during the day of the entrance ceremony where she had followed me all the way to my house before turning around, probably wasn't going to repeat itself. Was it? Probably. We exited the classroom. I glanced at Adachi's face, and just how you might have expected, her eyes and the area around them were far from stable. It almost seemed like she was going to start crying, or better put, her eyes kept trembling. In a lot of ways, she brought to mind an image of a heroine from one of those old shoujo mangas. We were in the process of walking down the stairs when I noticed that Adachi's gaze was focused on the bird strap hanging off my back. It sailed from left to right, and matching its movements, so did her eyes. Was she interested in it, perhaps? With that in mind, I took the thing on my palm and showed it to her. This prompted Adachi to nervously open her mouth.
Those things, they're some new craze?
Uh, craze? I think they're more like stable popular.
The fact that this had been sold next to straps portraying Ampan Man led me to assume that the bird in question was recognized as a similarly famous character. Plus, if those two men who'd come to buy their own were of any indication, its gambit of fans seemed to run quite wide.
It's kinda cute.
Like I promised Harumi, I intended to cherish the strap and keep it attached to me to my back. Also, a funny coincidence. My sister got really jealous after she saw it when I came home that day, prompting her to make a promise of her own with Yashiro to buy matching ones. As for her, well, she stared at the bird's face with intense interest before stating something to the effect of,
Uh, so they have animals like these on Earth?
if only.
Say, where did you buy this?
You want one?
Yeah, I was thinking I could put one on my bag too.
Hmm.
I was pretty sure they sold them in pretty much every store. More importantly, how did you like these sorts of characters? I found that part quite surprising. However, just as I was thinking about that, she continued.
Uh, to match with you.
Adachi's mouth twisted into a weird smile as she stated this. Only her mouth, though. I could also hear her faintly giggle to herself. Overall, overall, her condition brought to mind an image of an airplane failing to lift off. She wanted a matching one? Huh. While I didn't understand her exact motives, there was something about that which felt very typical of her. If she was to buy herself a pair, will the three of us, Jeremy and Adachi and I, count a match? No, likely not. We exited the school building, and even though I hadn't come by bike myself, I decided to stick with her till the bicycle shed. However, as we were walking there, Adachi suddenly gripped my index finger. With her head hung and her eyes tilted slightly upwards, she stared at me.
Do you mind if I hold your hand?
Before I could even say anything, my finger had already been wrapped within her palm. There was no retort left for me, nothing.
Sure. Go ahead.
I sat back, leaving things to proceed however they may. In no time, Adachi's hand practically swallowed mine, gulping it down like a hungry mouse. Jeremy had taken my left hand, but Adachi, she chose the right. That thought reminded me, Adachi didn't know about Jeremy. It made sense given that the two of them didn't share any connection, but still, I just couldn't help but feel like things might have taken a weird turn. were that ever to change. I got the impression that Adachi was the sort of person who hated letting people play with the toys she herself had taken a liking to. Well, she had taken a liking to me. Still, holding my hand, she used her remaining one to unlock her bike and pull it out. Personally, I was of the opinion that it would have been more efficient to start holding hands only after she'd done that, though. Then again, looking at it from her perspective, that would actually have been the more roundabout way of doing it. Dragging her bike, and me, Adachi made her way over to the school gate. That was as far as we would go together.
Well, then, later.
Yeah.
Adachi's eyes began to visibly tremble as I bid her farewell, giving off the impression that she felt reluctant to part ways.
Come on. We'll get to see each other tomorrow.
Right.
You will come to school, won't you?
Yeah.
Her reply was followed by her muttering something. She spoke far too quietly for me to make out the individual words, though I did get the impression that my name was mixed in there somewhere. Was she perhaps trying to say that the reason why she came to school was to see me? If so, then I have to admit it. I found that a little embarrassing. Anyway,
Adachi?
Yes?
I won't be able to go home if you don't let go of my hand.
I lifted the hand she was holding as if to emphasize my point. Considering that she had the weight of the bag on her side, I will be at a definite disadvantage for this to come down to a game of tug of war. Adachi's mouth instantly fell wide open, and in panic, she began to let go. However, halfway, she stopped. I could see the corners of her lips twitch, all the while her cheeks and nose turned deep crimson.
I. I won't let you go.
Huh?
Adachi's face was growing redder by the second. Likewise, her lower lip continued to twitch, making it seem like she was filled to the brim with emotion.
I won't let you go.
Yes, I hear that.
I. I. I won't.
Her enthusiasm quickly deflated. It was almost like she tried to be funny but failed. The other day, I pointed out how Adachi had a tendency to resemble a spirit dog, and nowhere was their similarity more pronounced than here. It really was the first image that came to my mind as I stared at her downcast face. To add to this analogy, the, top the tops of hair hanging on each side of her head look, in a way, like dog ears. Oh, and don't take this as me making fun of her. It's more that, with all due respect, I found this version of Adachi to be way more amusing. It was a lot of fun just watching her. I continued doing so until eventually Adachi lifted her head. Her face is still bright red.
Come here for a bit.
Huh?
Her words had barely registered in my ears by the time she began pulling by the hand.
Faring just as badly as I'd expected to in this small match of tug of war, I ended up being dragged in the opposite direction of where I lived. While there was a part of me that worried she might take me somewhere really far away, I ultimately chose to disregard those worries in favor of letting matters resolve themselves and seeing where that would place me. Thankfully, that turned out to be a reasonable choice. And we only ended up going around the corner of the school before Adachi stopped. It was there, by the school's back wall facing the nearby fields, that I remembered it. Adachi was a delinquent. Perhaps she was about to at last demonstrate her true character? Though obviously a joke, what happened in reality was almost as shocking. Without any warning, she took a step towards me. After that step came another, followed by
What?
her clinging onto me. Her arms wrapped around my neck and my back, and her slender body pressed against mine.
I.
That wasn't even all. As next, Adachi began proclaiming something extremely loudly. This surprise attack caught me off guard, to the point that I almost found myself instinctively pulling my head away. The fact that she'd brought her mouth right next to my ear certainly didn't help. I wonder, was this an okay time for me to tell her not to yell into my ear?
Shimamura, I think you're nice.
Her passion ended up dying out before she managed to finish her sentence, which, in a way, was very characteristic of her. Now then, I was nice? What sort of nice? In what way did she meant that? I couldn't tell. The process through which Adachi had landed on that word had all taken place within her mind, meaning that only she could. I didn't even know if I was supposed to feel embarrassed or delighted. Adachi wouldn't offer any further explanation. Instead, she simply remained how she was, her arms wrapped around me, slowly swaying her body from side to side. The way her head was positioned right next to mine almost made it feel like she was resting it on my shoulder. And it was this lack of distance between us which allowed me to sense the warmth radiating off of it. Or, better put, heat. Based on how she was, I got the impression that, were I to wait for just a moment, smoke might start coming out of her ears. The flames would blow up, consuming her in mere seconds. That was the way Adachi appeared to me, like she was made of straw. Speaking of, was it about time I could ask her what her reasoning for doing this was?
So, why did you hug me all of a sudden?
Saying that she clung onto me sounded almost mechanical in my opinion, which was why I decided to use a different word instead. How Adachi reacted to my question, I wasn't able to tell. The fact that her body was still pressed against mine meant that I wasn't able to gauge her expression. All I could feel was this ticklish sensation of her breath hitting my shoulder.
Because for so long this didn't happen. Nothing did.
Nothing?
You were with those other girls and
She grasped me tighter, almost as if her fingers were digging into my back. I was left just as clueless by her answer as I've been before, and yet, within her trembling voice, I've heard the slightest amount of bite mixed in. Those thorns had delicately stabbed the deepest parts of my ears, giving me insight I needed to figure out what was going on here. Well, I wasn't entirely sure, but still, I had a pretty good idea. Lightly tapping Adachi shaking back, I opened my mouth.
Jealousy. Huh?
Her head jolted slightly in response to my words. I chose to give her a wry smile.
What a troublesome girl you are.
With every small breath she took, the hair covering her ears continued to waver. Watching it, I couldn't help but pat her head. It seemed that this was what Adachi wanted from me. For me to play the role of an older sister. Or perhaps a mother? I was reminded of the conversation I've had with her actual mother the one time I'd met her, based on which I'd come to the conclusion that she was starved for affection. At the same time, things weren't that simple. She was in the same grade I was. Could I really do it? Act as a replacement for her mother? I found my eyes turning away from the thought, my face growing stiff. Were someone from our class, Sancho or any of them, to witness what was happening here, that would no doubt invite a massive misunderstanding. Weird rumors would instantly start floating throughout the school. Adachi was most likely aware of that. And yet, being her, it might have been that she didn't particularly care. Really, what was going on here? I wasn't sure. Regardless, I continued patting her back, comforting her.
So, are you good now?
I asked her after a while, having found a good opportunity to do so. Slowly, Adachi pulled herself away from me, almost as if she was drifting through space in zero gravity. I looked and saw that her face was now colored bright crimson. It was a similar tinge of red to what you might expect to see after spending hours outside during the winter. Truly, this was the Adachi I knew. The flimsy house of straw built upon the foundation of her being a second-year student had burnt away, leaving only a grass-covered plain behind. Having herself been the one to set that house on fire, some amount of flame's heat appeared to still linger within her.
Alright then. Now, I better head home. You too, Sakura. Okay?
I ordered her, going as far as to pat her head. This prompted Adachi to protest. Her eyes turned upwards, and her entire face tinged red.
Why are you treating me like a child?
Why? Was that really what she was asking me? I wish she'd make such objections only after taking a good look at her own behavior.
Anyway, please let go of my hand now.
I wasn't exactly a fan of how sweaty my hand was getting. Adachi's eyes grew narrow and her shoulders shook as she released me. It was almost like we'd been connected by an invisible thread. Really, what we were doing? That was all I could think of as I glanced at my palm, still warm even now that it'd been freed.
Afterwards, can I call you?
The way Adachi asked that made it sound like it was to make up for the fact that she'd had to let go of my hand. Apparently, she wasn't done seeking affection just yet.
Call me? Sure, I don't mind.
A question appeared in my mind. Did she really have that many things to talk about? It felt to me like we'd exchange a few words and then sit there in silence like we always did. And though that was already painful at the best times, with Adachi on the other end of the call, I had to be the one bringing up new topics and keeping the conversation going, as if actively trying to keep the silence at bay. To be perfectly honest with you, it wasn't exactly my favorite thing in the world to do. Perhaps one day I would attain the necessary level of enlightenment to enjoy those moments of silence, but today most certainly wasn't it. Still, it wasn't fair to say that it was all downsides. The look of joy on Adachi's face over my answer, for example, wasn't bad at all.
Okay, I'll call you around 7, so be ready.
Having said that, she hopped onto her bike and rode off, pedaling furiously. Wait, around 7? Huh?
Oh, but that's when we eat dinner.
I tried to correct her, at the same time realizing that I was far too late. Ah, no way could she hear me at this point. Yeah, I decided to give up on trying and just head home for now.
I tidied up my uniform, all messy from earlier, after which I gave my itchy neck a scratch. Though personally I viewed it as ordinary that dinner was between 6 and 7, it seemed that Adachi had no such intuition. I suppose that made sense. I couldn't exactly imagine her being someone who would dine on a regular schedule. The house you grew up, the people who raised you, the things you saw, the things that were ingrained in you. Two high school students of the same age could vary massively in their views and feelings based on their environment. I found that to be quite intriguing.
Could we eat dinner a bit earlier? I'm starving.
I said to Mom, standing in the kitchen. Explaining my reasoning from the beginning seemed like way too much work, which was I decided to simply lie instead.
I'm making it right now.
She stated blandly over her shoulder, sounding more annoyed than anything. Though technically I replied, it didn't exactly answer my question.
Would you like an egg bolo?
It was Yashiro who spoke this time, having slate in a bag of sweets in hand. It seemed that lately she'd pretty much become a permanent resident of our house. I wasn't actually hungry, but I still took one. They taste exactly how I remember them.
Well then, how about you eat by yourself before the rest of us?
Mom suggested. I guess she didn't always ignore what her daddy said, just most of the time.
Okay, that sounds good.
I replied before sitting down at the table. My little sister was definitely going to have something to say about this, that was for sure.
By the way, what's for dinner?
The roasted chicken I bought.
Chicken, huh? I almost wanted to comment on the massive size of the pieces she'd cut out,
I can hardly wait.
stated the blue girl, having for some reason sat down next to me. I stared at her, which in turn prompted her to hold out the bag of sweets. In what way exactly had she interpreted my gaze to assume that that was the thing to do here? I had not the faintest clue.
Do you want a bolo with it?
Apparently, the wrong way. Through this and that, I'd end up finishing dinner before the rest of my family, and now sat in my room, waiting. Patience most certainly wasn't one of Adachi's virtues, and to be perfectly honest, I'd been expecting her to call at least 30 minutes earlier. Yet she hadn't. My phone had yet to make a sound even though it was already past 6:30. Watching TV, I waited with the device sitting next to me. Waited for that moment. Second half of my day was growing to be quite Adachi-centric. It was almost as if a dam had been erected between us for the 2 weeks we didn't interact, and now that it was gone, all the things that had been building up behind were free to gush out simultaneously, resulting in a flow so intense I felt like I was going to be swept off my feet by the sheer velocity of it. I couldn't help but ask myself, were the weeks that formed the beginning of my second year in high school going to be flash away? Would this be the start of a different type of daily routine? If nothing else, I got the impression that my life was going to be slightly more busy going forward. I wondered, was Adachi also sitting like this in her room, waiting for the clock to hit 7 so that she could call me? I could almost see it in my mind, her kneeling on her bed with her phone resting before her. Imitating that image I had of her, I went ahead and sat on my knees myself. I then checked my phone, and it was there that I felt like I hit upon the truth. This pose, leaning slightly forward with my back rounded like that of a cat, was the essence of Adachi. I went on to kill some time with my little sister, absolutely furious that I got to it before her, as well as Yashiro, having now turned into an egg bolo dispensary. Then, the exact moment the clock hit 7, my phone rang. Her accuracy brought to mind a cuckoo clock, or perhaps an Adachi clock. I picked up the phone, put the TV on mute, and then answered.
Shimamura?
Instead of a hello or anything of that sort, Adachi chose to start the conversation by confirming who she was talking to. Quite strange, considering that she'd been the one to call me, not the other way around.
Yep, it's me. Good evening.
Evening.
Are your legs getting numb?
Huh? What? How did you?
Bullseye. I couldn't help but let out a short giggle. Meanwhile, Adachi sounded absolutely shaken on the other end of the call. It was almost like she was worried that I was somehow spying on her.
Just a random guess. Anyway,
Anyway?
was there something you wanted to talk about?
I decided to urge her to speak up. Not that I seriously thought it would lead to anything. Sure enough, Adachi replied the sad way I had expected her to.
No. Not really. It's just we haven't talked on the phone at all recently, and
Recently? Try ever. It was rare for us to have a little conversation at the best of times, and much more so on the phone. We were simply too plain to have anything interesting to talk about. Normally, people might resort to talking about mutual hobbies or school clubs they both went to, but with no such topics at our disposal, our conversation usually ended up falling flat. And yet, we kept going for more than a half a year. There was one thing in common between Adachi and me. We were both equally strange.
Adachi, do you ever find yourself wishing you had friends?
In the end, I had to be the one to bring up a new topic like usual. This one specifically had come to mind after I thought back to the events of the lunch break.
huh? No, not really.
Adachi sounded anything but confident in regard to her answer. She sure became passive when talking on the phone, huh? It led me to wonder, how on earth did an introvert like her manage to bring herself to grab my hand or straight up hug me?
Yes?
Adachi's attempt to speak came to an immediate stop as she stumbled over her words. Then, after a few moments, she tried again.
I already have you, Shimamura.
Her words caught me totally off guard. Where was this coming from? It was only a couple of seconds later that I realized she'd meant it as an answer to my earlier question, a reason why she didn't need any more friends. Even if her reply did ultimately make sense in the context, it still wasn't quite what I'd been expecting to hear, something akin to
You're my friend, Shimamura.
would have made more sense to me. Sure, they might both ultimately mean the same thing, but still, choosing to put it that way was just another weird quirk about her behavior today that didn't quite coalesce with my past experiences. Now, this was going to take a while, wasn't it? Probably I should sit down somewhere more comfortable. Using my roll-up futon as a cushion, I straightened up my legs. There I once again heard Adachi's voice.
Shimamura, do you talk to other people on the phone?
Was this a new topic or one connected to what we'd been talking about earlier? I wasn't sure. There was something about the way she'd worded a question that made it difficult to decipher the true meaning behind it.
Yeah, I do. Every now and then.
My mind immediately went to Tarumi. If I call her Taru and she called me Shima, maybe I should start calling Adachi Ada? No, that was weird.
I see.
Those four letters came out of her mouth as a stiff lump, almost as if they'd melted into one.
Again, it was hard for me to tell if she was disappointed or merely apathetic. In either case, her reaction wasn't a positive one, that was for sure.
Do you find that unfortunate?
Why would I think that? That she only calls me? I only call her? But that doesn't.
Hello? I can't hear you.
If she wanted to mumble something to herself with no intention of letting me hear it, then that was all fine and good. But you had to remember that we were having a phone call here. I could still hear bits and pieces.
No. It's nothing.
It certainly didn't sound that way. Regardless, I didn't want to press her on it, which was why I decided to simply let the matter go.
Alright then.
Right.
Silence once again fell between us. I glanced at the clock and saw that not even 5 minutes had gone by. Rubbing my big toes together to kill time, I found myself wondering what was going on. Adachi had brought up a topic, so did that mean it was my turn next? I kinda got that impression. Why I was driven by some weird sense of obligation to do this in turns, that I didn't know. I suppose it felt more equal.
Oh, that reminds me. Thanks for the pastry.
I'd missed my chance to actually thank her during lunch, and doing so now seemed like my best bet to smooth out the awkward mood between us.
Right. Yeah.
I couldn't help but silently giggle to myself. This conversation really wasn't going anywhere, was it? Now, imagine my surprise when Adachi actually continued speaking.
Shimamura, do you like sweet things?
What an ordinary thing to ask. In fact, so ordinary that it rolled over to being unusual. Had we never talked about this before? At the sports hall, perhaps? I went ahead and tried to remember those days. We might not have. Time back then had simply flown by, leaving nothing behind its wake.
Is there anyone out there who doesn't? Yeah, I like them quite a bit.
Not as much as my little sister, though. That girl ate so many sweets that you'd be forgiven for mistaking her for a resident of Candyland.
Well then, next time, let's have some together.
Huh? Oh, okay, sure.
Donuts or souffle omelets? Going for a crepe might be nice this time.
Hooray!
Although her words were likely meant to express joy, sounding as stiff as she did, all they accomplished was make me feel slightly uncomfortable. And With that, we fell right back into the Valley of Silence. Having to climb back up each and every time was starting to get quite tiresome. I needed more taurine.
So, is it time we end the call?
Huh?
Adachi sounded extremely shaken, almost as if someone had taken her voice and overlapped it with itself.
We'll rack up quite the phone bill.
Oh, it's fine. I have savings.
Still, it's a waste of money if we don't say anything, don't you think?
She'd worked hard for that money, wearing that China dress and all. It really didn't matter, but every time I saw her in it, I couldn't help but wonder how terrible the dress would look on me. The only way you could pull it off was if you were pretty, like Adachi.
No, not at all. After all, it means that I get to, um, get to.
Get to what?
I could hear the sounds of finger tapping against wooden floor on the other end of the call. The image that came to my mind was not that of a person eating candy, but instead of someone who was irritated. The tapping eventually came to a stop, and after a short pause, Adachi continued.
When I'm talking to you on the phone, I get to hog your time. All to myself.
It sounded like she was having a lot of trouble getting the word out of her mouth. A similar thing happened to me for a moment. I thought it was impossible to say anything. Hog my time to herself? That sounded like quite a heavy expression. And yet, thinking back to all the things I'd done with her, it wasn't exactly shocking.
Adachi,
Huh?
you are that sort of person, aren't you? The kind that feels like they need to hog everything to themselves?
She likely felt similarly about our friendship. That certainly was the impression I got based on the event of the afternoon.
No, not really.
I'm not sure if I believe you.
I'm telling
I'm telling you. I'm not like that. I'm not. I'm not.
sounding almost like she'd been pushed into a corner by my statement. At that, she continued repeating the same words over and over again. I went ahead and imagined that sight, Adachi sitting there, all flustered and confused. As I did, I found my mouth opening on its own.
Well, still, if someone sees you as being important to them, no matter what, I don't think that's ever a bad thing.
She obviously couldn't see it, but saying those words caused my face to grow quite red. I pretended to laugh, although she had realized I was pretending. It would have been even more embarrassing. Now, how about Adachi? Was she okay? I tried listening for hints, but couldn't hear anything on her hand. It was pure silence. I couldn't hear her breathing, and yet, despite this, she was still on the line. What could be going on? Thinking that to myself, I turned to lie on my side when, all of a sudden, the strangest noise hits my ear. It sounded like Adachi was choking, like she tried to breathe, but instead of coming out smoothly, the air in her lung had burst her throat wide open. The sound repeated multiple times. I could only assume she'd stopped breathing for some reason, and then, when she ran out of oxygen, started coughing violently. I won't describe how it sounded in any more details here. because doing so would be a serious assault on her honor. Yeah, that's how bad it was. In any case, following her flashy performance, Adachi went on to say all sorts of things, sounding bored, tearful, and self-loathing, and a million other things all at the same time. I put every bit of effort I had into trying to comfort her, or to support her, I guess you could say. And before I knew it, a surprising amount of time had gone by. Though quite abnormal, it might be that I ended up being saved by Adachi. Now, was it a good time to end the call? I glanced at the clock and saw that around 30 minutes had passed since we started. In truth, most of that time had been spent in silence, but still, I was surprised that it lasted for this long.
See you at school tomorrow. Don't skip class.
I.
Yes.
Did you just go through this exact exchange?
I won't. You shouldn't either, Shimamura.
Her sentence sounded half-baked, as if her voice was jumping around all over the place. I waited a few moments, after which I just had to let out a short giggle. First Arumi, and now her. It seemed that I simply wasn't able to let go of my policy of acting cheerful and open-hearted. There were two things those relationships shared in common: me, and the fact that they weren't going anywhere. Wait, huh? Was it my fault? Adachi still wasn't showing any signs of actually ending the call, which was I had to do so myself on the count of three. Dealing with Adachi, it was often the case that I had to be the one to take the initiative, and if I'm being totally honest with you, I found it quite exhausting. I simply wasn't cut out for the role. The call now over, I pulled my extended leg and assumed a position where I was almost hugging them against myself. A groan of sort leaked out of the depth of my throat as I sat there rubbing my knees together. I wonder, was tomorrow going to be like this too? Or would it be the fact that Adachi had gone full throttle today meant that she'd be slightly more relaxed? On a second thought, that didn't really matter. Thing would undoubtedly follow a similar progression regardless of how calm she was. Adachi would draw near me, other things would distance themselves. A span of time belonging only to me and her would be born. Yeah, that's how it would go. When I was with Adachi, all the possibilities and hypotheticals surrounding me grew fixed. Limited number of people you walk with, and naturally, your choice would become limited as well. It wasn't necessarily a good or a bad thing, just a situation I found myself in. It also made me think, it went without saying, but like any other person, I ought to make the decision that were best for myself. Adachi had made up her mind about choosing a path where she had no needs for other. Well, putting it like that might be overselling it a little, but still, for a high school student, it was a very meaningful decision.
As for me,
Would I one day be able to finish the rest of that sentence? Softly, I closed my eyes.
Bonus chapter Yashiro, the Visitor. Part 7. Having realized that this was quite a bad spot to be doing homework, I turned my eyes to the side. Sis and Yachi were watching TV together, with Yachi sitting between her legs. She leaned against her, which caused the particles of light radiating off her hair to float around Sis's jaw and neck. Still wearing her school uniform, Sis continued to doze off, her eyes half open. She always seemed tired during spring. As for Yachi, there was a wide grin on her face. Also, every now and then, she'd reach into her bag and pull out an egg bolo and eat it. Comparing the faces of the two, I found it difficult to concentrate on the homework sitting on the desk in front of me. My hand came to a stop. Sis, propping Yachi up. Yachi, leaning against Sis. And then me, feeling strangely gloomy towards both of them. Thoughts and feelings I wasn't quite able to make sense of continued piling up deep within me. Having noticed that I was staring their way, Miss lazily turned her eyes towards me, looking like she might fall asleep any second now. Our eyes met. I wasn't sure why, but I felt kinda awkward.
Is it too loud? Should I turn the volume down?
Turn her down, too.
She added, while placing her hand on top of Yachi's head. This didn't exactly silence her, and still smiling, she went on to invite me to join them.
Come watch with us, Shou.
It's fine. I have homework.
Why had I chosen to react to her innocent invitation in such a stubborn fashion? I really wasn't sure.
How admirable.
Phii. Very admirable.
The way they praised me didn't sound like they meant anything with it, but more that they were just saying things at random. I scratched my head before returning to my homework, and yet, having solved just a couple more problems, my hand once again came to a stop. I took another glance to my side. Just as you might have expected, Sis was still dozing off, and likewise, Yachi was still grinning. Once more. Invite me to join you just once more. Gosh, why did I always have to be so stubborn? That was the one part of my personality that I really didn't like.
Hey, Yachi, come here for a second.
Knowing well that there was nothing I could say to get Sis to stand up, I decided to address Yachi instead.
Yes?
She asked while slowly turning my way.
I was thinking, could you help me out with my homework?
I didn't actually need any help. I could easily solve the problems by myself, and yet I still said that. Yachi didn't see through my deception. On the contrary, she looked really proud of herself.
Phii. Are you asking me for help? Smart choice, Shou.
Having said that, she ran over to me. I felt relieved, but also like I'd done something wrong. Those two emotions continued dripping by my core.
After all, I'm Yashimon.
Ugh. She was still going on with that thing? I glanced behind her and saw Sis laying on the floor with her arms and legs spread out.
Now then, what are we dealing with here?
Yachi asked while examining the book I had opened on the desk.
Huh? It's math.
You should have been able to tell that easily by all the plus and minus signs, and yet, based on the look on Yachi's face, she appeared to have no clue. First, the whole cake thing a few days back, and now this? I felt like she was ignorant of a few too many things. What kind of school could it have been she said she had graduated from to leave her so lacking in common sense?
Hmm.
I waited in silence. All while unsure if Yachi was actually thinking about anything. She groaned. She stared at the book. Then, unexpectedly, she slammed it shut. Following this, she turned to face me before opening her tiny mouth.
Huh?
Repeat.
It was incredibly difficult for me to make out what she was saying.
Or,
I went ahead and imitated her the best I could.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yachi nodded, appearing mighty satisfied. She even went as far as to cross her arms, almost like she was proud of herself or something.
what was that?
Space speech.
Is space?
It was the language everyone used to speak a while back. Although, since that was before I was born, I don't really know it all that well.
If she didn't know it, then why did she seem so self-confident?
I will teach you about the space show.
About space?
To start off, my people live on average for 800,000 years. This is relatively a long time and
Sounding filled to the brim with joy, Yachi began her explanation. Was she lying? Or was she not? It was hard for me to say. At no point had I said that I'd actually listened to her, and yet, before I knew it, I found myself in that role, carefully taking in every single one of her words. Numbers as large as the ones Yachi spoke of appeared nowhere in my maths book. She also jumped around as she pleased from one topic straight to the next. All in all, I couldn't help but feel like I was in the middle of a tempest, rocked about by numbers and figures beyond my comprehension. On the flip side, Sis appeared at the exact same time as she had moments earlier. I watched as she rolled over in her sleep. Yes, only I was engulfed by the storm. Yachi continued to talk, and as she did, I took a quick glance at the closed maths book. A thought, which would remain forever private, crossed my mind. She wasn't just trying to distract me from the fact that she couldn't solve the equations, was she?